Living Power with Dan Hurst.
What do you do? How do you handle those distractions? Well, there are actually 4 things that you need to do when that happens. When these distractions come in your life, when you're seeking to do God's will, but things come along and it just seems like it's directing you in a new or different direction. First of all, be confident that you're right where God wants you. That's the first thing. Notice what Nehemiah says. He says, look, I'm doing a great work here. He knew that he was right where God wanted him to be. That was the center of God's will for him. And so he knew that that was where he was supposed to be. He was confident that that was God's will for his life. Now, I'm going to give you a bunch of personal examples as we go along here because as I studied this, I thought, oh man, that's exactly what's happened in my life too. I remember a couple of years ago, I was asked to start another open class in the 9:30 hour. And the idea was that because of the success of this class, that we could duplicate that in another class at a different time period. And it just seemed like it was just a great idea. You know, it'd be a wonderful plan. Wouldn't have to do anything different other than just do the same lesson twice and use the same lesson, same PowerPoint, same room, all of that stuff. And it seemed like a good idea, but the more I started thinking about it and praying about it, I realized that's not what God had called me to do. That's not where I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be, I am right where I'm supposed to be. I'm doing what I think God wants me to do, and I'm focused on that. And to reach beyond that and try to do something else, even though it seems like a good idea, isn't the right thing. That's not where God wanted me to be. I need to be confident that I'm right where God wants me to be if I'm going to be able to withstand the distractions and the challenges. You need to be right in the center of God's will and know that that's where you're supposed to be. Know that this is what God wants out of my life. Now, part of the problem is a lot of us don't know if we're in God's will or not. Then we struggle with whether or not we're doing what God wants us to do. At that point, that's where you need to find some real face time with God. Some real good, solid face time where you just really get the blessing of God in your life and the confidence that I'm doing what God wants me to do. I'm where God wants me to be. I'm accomplishing what it is that God wants me to accomplish. I'm focused on the Lord. That time is the time that God will begin to use to affirm and to confirm what He's doing in and through your life. Be confident that you're right where God wants you to be. Now, yes, there are times when you should walk through those open doors. There are times, you know, I'm a firm believer that as God opens doors, you walk through them. But here's the key. You have to be sure that God's the one that's opening the door. Sometimes it's not God opening the door. But here's something that you also need to be aware of. When God opens the door, He's also the one who leads you through it. And so just because there's an open door doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. But if it is God's will, He'll lead you through it. And I've also learned in my life that if it isn't God's will, that I can trust Him to shut the door. And I have to depend on Him to shut that door. There are lots of times when it just seems like, wow, this is exactly what I should be doing. And I just have to say, God, if this isn't your will, please shut the door. And He does. I've seen it over and over and over and over in my life. I remember one time a church had called me to come and pastor. And I felt, wow, this is just a great opportunity. This is really where I'm supposed to be. I was pretty excited about it. There was so much potential in this church. And I was pretty excited about it. It just seemed like the right thing to do. But I remember thinking, I'm just not positive this is what God wants. And so just simply praying, God, if this is what you want, then you lead me through it. But if it's not, then Lord, close the door. Shut the door. And I mean, it came down to the wire. I mean, it came down to the point where me saying yes or no. And I just simply said, Lord, I'm going to say yes unless you shut the door. And I don't even know how you're going to shut the door. But Lord, I'm going to leave it up to you to shut the door. And you know, what happened was that God began to work in those people's lives also. And they began to realize that He just really didn't want somebody that would come in and teach the Word. They wanted a CEO, a boss, to come in and just basically run their little church the way that they had been running it for the past 50 years. And that's the way they wanted to do it, and I wasn't going to operate that way. And it became very, very apparent to me just within a matter of 2 days that what they were looking for was just somebody to come in and pick up where they've always been, and they didn't really want to grow. They had great potential, great opportunities. They were in an amazing location for ministry, but they didn't want to grow. And that became so obvious, and that became the closed door for me. Immediately I began to realize, God, this is not, I would die here. You know, because they don't want to grow. And if they don't want to grow, Lord, then that's not where I need to be. And it became so obvious, and God just shut that door for me. Just at the last moment, it became so obvious to me. So, be confident that you're right where God wants you, and if the doors open up, let God be the one that leads you through the doors. Trust Him to lead you through it. I love what 1 Thessalonians 5:24 says. Faithful is He, I'm quoting it from the King James, faithful is He who called you, who also will do it. But what ESV and also the NIV version say is, the one who called you is faithful, and He will do it. In other words, if God called you to do His will, He will take you through it. He'll accomplish His purpose and His plan for your life. When you are called by God to accomplish something, God's going to see you through it. Trust Him for that. Be confident that you're right where God wants you.